When I first started diving into the lover archetype, I think I understood it in the same way that a lot of people do. Beauty, desire, magnetism, and attraction. The women that we often describe as lovers are typically the ones that we just can't help but look at. But as I've explored further, I've realized that their attractiveness is almost beside the point. Because the universal thread that connects women like Aphrodite and Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor isn't just that people found them desirable. It's that each one of them reveals an important truth about desirability itself. What happens when we know how to feel deeply? And what are the pitfalls of losing touch with that side of ourselves? And I think most importantly, what happens when we learn to generate that feeling of aliveness and desirability within ourselves instead of looking to the outside world to find it? Because the lover archetype really isn't concerned with being desired by everyone else. She's all about crafting a life that she desires, one that feels authentic and rich and fulfilling. The lover is simply someone who's in love with her own life. And that's what I want to talk about today. Across these 4 conversations, we're going to talk about the lover from a lot of different angles. Her gifts, her shadows, her mythology, and what she looks like when she finally comes home to herself. So pull up a chair and join the conversation. I'd love to have you. We're gonna get started by talking about the woman of the hour. This is an overview of the lover archetype. When people hear the word lover, they often think of one thing: romance, attraction, desire, something a little indulgent, maybe even a little bit dangerous. In a world where women are constantly navigating the expectations around beauty and desirability, the word can feel a little loaded. But the lover archetype, it's often one of the most misunderstood because it's not really about being desired at all. It's about becoming somebody who desires her own life. We're talking about what the lover archetype actually is, some of her strengths and pitfalls, and ways that you can tap into your lover energy today. No raunchiness required. The lover archetype isn't about romance. It's about falling in love with your life and the version of you that gets to live in it. When people think of the lover archetype, they picture women like Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, even fictional characters like Jessica Rabbit and Betty Boop. Women who are beautiful, magnetic, impossible to ignore. Women who seem completely at ease in their own identity. But what really unites these women isn't just how they're perceived. It's how they experience the world. Because the lover archetype is about more than just attraction. It's about aliveness. It's the part of you that feels deeply, that notices beauty, that lingers in a moment just a little bit longer, just because it feels good to be there. It's the part of you that gets excited over the little things, finds meaningful connection with others, and allows you to be moved by life experiences. The hallmark of the lover is that she doesn't rush through life. She experiences it. This is where sensuality comes in. And no, not in the way that we're typically taught to think about it. Sensuality isn't just about romance. It's about leaning into your senses intentionally. The intoxicating aroma of something delicious simmering away on the stove. The light, calming sounds of birds chirping, wind chimes tinkling, the breeze rustling as you head out on your morning walk. The richness and depth that you taste deep down in your soul as you enjoy your favorite cup of coffee, when you slow down long enough to really enjoy it. That lush fabric on your skin, the warmth of sunlight through a window pane. These are all small things, ordinary things, but the lover, she finds them extraordinary. She turns ordinary life into something worth feeling. Because a healthy lover isn't performing. She's not trying to be chosen. She's not chasing attention. She's open. She's present. She's receptive. She is in love with her life. And that energy, that fullness, that's what people are responding to. We experience this all the time, even if maybe we don't recognize it in the moment. Stopping into a bakery just because the scent of something delicious caught your attention as you were walking by. Texting a friend you haven't spoken to in a while just because they're on your mind. Getting dressed up, not for anyone or anything else, but because it makes you feel like your best self. Those moments, that's lover energy. Not because these moments are big and impressive, but because they're intentional. But like every archetype, the lover has her shadow, because when your life revolves around pleasure and connection, it gets really easy to lose your balance. Too much pleasure can become escape. And that escape can take many forms. Sometimes it looks like overindulgence, shopping, food, distractions like social media. Sometimes it looks like chasing emotional highs, the drama, the intensity, getting comfortable in relationships that feel exciting, even if they're ultimately unhealthy. And sometimes it looks a lot quieter, more internal, a need for validation, a reliance on other people to spark something in you that you're no longer capable of sparking within yourself. When someone or something becomes your center for aliveness, you've lost yourself. And this is exactly where the lover becomes ungrounded, because the very thing that makes her powerful, her openness, can be the very same thing that destabilizes her. She becomes overly attached, jealous and manipulative, emotionally reacted, and ultimately disconnected from her own center. So, how do we get back into balance? These are my top 5 ways to tap back into your lover energy that you can do right now. Number 1 is that self-love has to come first. Before we can really step into our inner lover energy, we have to cultivate that feeling within ourselves first. Not as a concept, but as a practice, a way of life. Doing something kind for yourself, maybe even a little bit luxurious, just because you can. A morning routine that you really enjoy. A treat that you didn't have to earn. Moments of care that feel intentional. The key thing to remember here is that pleasure doesn't need permission. My second tip is to engage your senses. The lover lives in the body, not the mind. So instead of rushing through your day, take a moment to be still. Pause and ask yourself, what do you see that you enjoy? What do you hear that makes you happy? What do you feel that brings that spark into your life? Remember that sensuality is all about presence, which brings me to my next tip. Slow down, because you can't really feel your life if you're rushing through it. Even small pauses are important. These are the moments where you can disconnect, recharge, breathe, exist without urgency. You can't receive all the fullness of life if you're moving too fast to notice it. Number 4 is to reconnect with joy. Think back to those things that lit you up before you started filtering yourself for the world. For me, as a kid, that was art. Drawing, painting, anything that I could get lost in creatively. But somewhere along the way, I got really concerned about what other people would think about that. and I stopped. Coming back to my artistic roots on my personal healing journey has been monumental for me. Even finding little ways to express that joy in my day-to-day life, like pulling out my favorite adorable little coloring book at the end of the long day, has been such a grounding practice for me to get into. It's not for productivity. It's not to accomplish anything. It's just to make me smile. And that's what true joy is. Happiness just for happiness' sake. Lovers are intentional about reconnecting to the things that bring them joy. Which brings me to my final tip. And I really cannot stress this one enough. In order to get back in touch with your lover, you have to intentionally nurture connection. The lover thrives in all connection, not just romantic, but human. And it's crucial to remember that different relationships and different connections fulfill different parts of who we are. I'm such a homebody, and there's nothing I love more than spending the day with my husband and my kid. I could really do it all the time, and I frequently do, to the point where I maybe lose touch with some of my girlfriends. I don't see them as often, we don't catch up, not because I don't love them or care, but because life gets busy and I'm moving too quickly. But I always find there's such a beautiful wholeness that I feel when I do take the time to have a girls' night, to get away, to nurture those bonds outside of my immediate family. There's a kind of fullness that comes from having deep, meaningful conversations, shared laughter, and from being seen from all the different angles of who you are. The lover doesn't just seek connection. She allows herself to expand who she is through it. The lover archetype isn't just about being desired. It's about becoming someone who desires her own life. And when you're able to do that, you don't just feel differently. You move differently. You experience things more deeply. You become more present, more connected, more alive. And that's where the magnetism shows up. Not because you're trying, but because you're full. There is nothing more magnetic than someone who's in love with her own life. Once we start looking at the lover archetype as the embodiment of aliveness instead of purely romantic, we start to look at Aphrodite very differently. So often, this Greek goddess is reduced to beauty and seduction and sensuality. But she's so much more than that, because the myths of Aphrodite go so much deeper than just pure desire. She represents something primordial, an ancient force that's existed for the entirety of humanity. She represents desire before it morphed into something that women had to feel guilty about evoking. She's pleasure before it became performative. She's feeling and raw emotion before we felt the need to justify it. So before we look at what the lover energy looks like when it's distorted, let's go right back to the source material itself, to the goddess who embodied it. This is Aphrodite. Before psychology tried to name her, before self-help tried to explain her, before femininity became content, they knew her. They called her Aphrodite. And people have always been entranced by her. Not just because she was beautiful, not because men desired her, not because she had power through seduction. No, people found Aphrodite intoxicating because she embodied an ancient and primal truth, the force that makes life worth living. And that force still moves throughout. A quick note before we begin. Greek mythology is well known for being a bit dramatic, chaotic, messy, and slightly unhinged. While there are many versions of the myths that I'm going to be diving into more today, I'm going to be focusing on the versions that best highlight Aphrodite as an embodiment of the lover archetype. Now, let's begin where she did. It's a beautiful day off the coast of Cyprus. Waves roll in against the shoreline. Ocean brine perfumes the air. Sunlight scatters diamonds across the water. All seems calm. But beneath the surface, something world-changing is taking place. The Titan Kronos has just overpowered his primordial father, Uranus. And in the chaos of that violent shift in power, he's cast off a very important piece of Uranus's body into the ocean. And from that violence came sea foam. And from the foam came movement. And from that movement came form. A fully embodied woman emerged from the sea. Golden hair wrapped around her body in the sea breeze. She stood upon a luminous shell as though the ocean itself had carried her forward. She looked around and felt it all. The warmth of the sun, the scent of the air, the feeling of the water as it splashed against her skin. And upon feeling all of these incredible sensations, she smiled. Because if there was one thing that Aphrodite understood from the very beginning, it's that life is meant to be experienced. The world would come to know her by many names: the goddess of love, beauty, desire, temptation. But those names are too small for what she really was. Because you see, Aphrodite wasn't just a goddess. She was the embodiment of a principle. She was desire given form, beauty personified, pleasure with a pulse. She wasn't born like the other gods had been and shaped by her experiences. She emerged a full-grown woman, fully formed, whole, ready to awaken something in everyone she met. And that's why Aphrodite remains one of the best examples of the lover archetype. Not just shallow romance, not attention-seeking, not performance, but the pure, unadulterated feeling of being alive. It didn't take long for Aphrodite to completely unsettle Olympus, because desire is powerful, even among the gods. And soon came one of the best examples of Aphrodite's effortless magnetism, the judgment of Paris. A golden apple was strategically released at a divine wedding on Mount Olympus. Inscribed in the apple were 3 simple words that would change everything: to the fairest. And immediately, tension bloomed. Zeus's wife, Hera, the queen of Olympus, naturally stepped forward first. She picked up the apple and inspected it, graciously thanking whoever had brought it to the party. As Hera lifted the apple to her lips, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, stepped forward. Athena tried to calmly reason with Hera and explain to her that if we're talking fairness in terms of justice and reason, then clearly the golden apple was meant for her. So Athena steps forward and reaches her arm out to take the apple from Hera. But as she does so, the crowd gets silent. Aphrodite quietly steps forward from the crowd. No argument, no speech, no performance. Her presence alone speaks for itself. There would be no arguing amongst the gods that Aphrodite certainly was deserving of an apple inscribed to the fairest on Olympus. Her very presence spoke for itself. She shifted the room when she walked into it. And that kind of power, although often underrated, is incredibly important. Not the power of domination, not the power of intellect, but the power of presence. So Aphrodite approaches the other 2 goddesses, gliding as if she was floating on a cloud. Tension hung thick like fog in the air. Each of the 3 goddesses believed that she was the rightful recipient of this golden apple. There was only one person on Olympus that was worthy of judging this contest: Zeus himself. But even Zeus knew better than to weigh in on this argument. He was trapped. He knew there was no way that he could pick one of these goddesses without gravely offending the other 2. So he did what many leaders do when faced with an impossible task, he outsourced. Instead of making the call himself, Zeus left the final decision in the hands of a mortal man, Prince Paris of Troy. So each goddess approached Paris and made him a tempting offer. Regal Hera stepped forward first. The Queen of Olympus offered him power, dominance, rulership over all of Europe and Asia. Wise Athena was next. The renowned strategist, defender of heroes, offered Paris glory, wisdom in battle, and the power of all of Greece's greatest heroes. True to form, Aphrodite went last and let her gifts speak for themselves. She slowly sauntered over to Paris, brushing a hair out of his face. She bent down and whispered in his ear, barely audible. Once again, there was no big fuss, no show. She didn't need it. She was confident in what she was offering to the young prince, the love of the most beautiful woman in all the world. And Paris chose her because Aphrodite understood something timeless, that there are few forces more compelling than desire. The healthy lover doesn't chase. She doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't exhaust herself trying to prove her worth to others. She knows what she carries. Aphrodite's magnetism wasn't just her beauty. All three goddesses were divinely beautiful. But what set her apart was that she was fully embodied. She was connected to herself, to pleasure, to confidence, to the feeling of being alive. And that type of energy is magnetic because people enjoy being around someone who enjoys being within themselves. But Aphrodite's victory came at a cost because the woman she'd promised to Paris, Helen of Sparta, was already married. And the fallout from Paris taking claim of Helen like she was some sort of prize became the stuff of legend, the Trojan War. Naturally, blame found its way to Aphrodite. She was accused of causing chaos, of breaking hearts and manipulating emotions, destroying kingdoms through vanity. And this blame of Aphrodite really highlights one of the oldest misunderstandings of the lover archetype. People who don't fully understand it will try to reduce it, to minimize it. They call it shallow, frivolous, manipulative, dangerous. But desire itself isn't the problem. Misused desire is. We see this even now. People reduce beauty. They ignore sensuality. They minimize feminine magnetism. But desire is so much bigger than romance. People can have a desire for healing, for growth, a desire for meaning, or a desire for a different life. Desire is so often that first spark for transformation. It's the force that makes someone finally leave, or finally begin, or finally choose themselves. Aphrodite embodied love in all its forms, including grief. And perhaps nowhere is that more evident than in the myth of Adonis. This is one of those myths that has a lot of different versions out there. But one thing that they all agree on is that he was beautiful, devastatingly so. The kind of beauty that makes people, and yes, even the gods, pause. Aphrodite in particular, who always took notice of something beautiful when it bloomed, loved him deeply. And he loved her too. Not because she wanted to possess his beauty like everyone else did, but because she knew how to cherish it. These two were completely enraptured with each other. But Adonis was mortal, and one day he was killed while out on a hunt. Aphrodite rushed to him, gently cradling the head of the man that she loved. And in that moment, she faced one of the most painful truths of love. And that's the fact that loving something means opening yourself up to losing it. But this is where she reveals the highest expression of the lover archetype. She didn't let the grief harden her. She transformed it. From the places where Adonis's blood touched the earth, Aphrodite made flowers bloom. Beauty from sorrow, life from pain, meaning from loss. That is the lover energy in its most mature, embodied form. The lover archetype is not just about romance. It's about falling in love with your life. All of it. The joyful seasons, the uncertain seasons, the heartbreaks, the losses, the rebirths. Because everything that you experience becomes a part of you. An embodied lover feels deeply, but she doesn't drown in those emotions. She allows the pain to move through her system and turns it into wisdom, art, gratitude, and depth. She becomes more beautiful, more magnetic, and more herself through everything that she survived. Aphrodite beautifully illustrates what a healthy, embodied lover can be. She takes whatever life throws her way and turns it into something meaningful. Things always seem to work out for her because that's the lens through which she views her own life. Now, don't get me wrong. There are plenty of examples of Aphrodite living in the shadow side of the lover archetype too. Jealousy, comparison, self-focus, emotional chaos when untethered. And in our modern day, we do that too. We chase stimulation instead of sensation. We perform our lives instead of experiencing them. We look for love on the outside instead of cultivating those feelings within ourselves. But Aphrodite reminds us that it's not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to those things that make you feel alive. The sunlight on your skin, the meal you actually taste, the room you soften by entering, the art that moves you, the desire that points you toward the life you want to live. True allure is often the byproduct of aliveness, not effort. And when we embody a healthy lover archetype, we become emotional alchemists. We're able to take whatever it is that life throws at us and turn it into something beautiful. I think Aphrodite is the perfect case study for the lover in its most archetypal form. She's that desire that begins within and radiates to the whole world. But Marilyn Monroe takes that archetypal pattern and flips it on its head. Because Marilyn understood desire. She knew how to capture an audience, how to make them want her. She understood attention, fantasy, allure, and presence. The tragedy in her story is that the world's desire for Marilyn became louder than Norma Jean's interconnection with herself. And this is where the lover archetype becomes dangerous. This is what happens when the internal flame of the lover can't be ignited by you. And instead, you rely on those around you to light that flame within. So without further ado, let's dive into Marilyn's story. It's a beautiful spring evening, May 1962. At Madison Square Gardens, people were buzzing. They were getting ready for a birthday party, but not just any birthday party. This was a birthday party for the President of the United States. In the middle of the chaos of final preparations, a blonde bombshell sat quietly in her dressing room, waiting to put on a show the world wouldn't soon forget. She adjusted the strap on her dress, placed down one errant hair so it was laying just so, applied one final coat of bright red lipstick. She practiced her sultriest, silkiest voice in the mirror, the same way she had thousands of times before. She slipped into it seamlessly, almost as seamlessly as she'd slipped into that barely there crystal-studded ball gown that she was wearing for the occasion. This was the ticket. This is what people wanted from her. To experience her, to be drawn in, electrified. And if there was one thing she understood, it was how to captivate an audience. The world fell in love with Marilyn Monroe. Her voice, her laugh, the way she seemed to glow, like she was lit up from something deeper than just the surface. She was soft, playful, magnetic, and everywhere she went, people watched her. But the woman behind Marilyn was much harder to see. Before she was Marilyn, she was Norma Jean. Born in the summer of 1926 in the heart of Los Angeles, baby Norma Jean's early years were far removed from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Born to a relatively unstable mother with no knowledge of who her father was, Norma Jean was shuffled off from household to household. Never quite settled, never quite chosen. Throughout the instability of her youth, Norma Jean found comfort, solace, and escape watching films at her local cinema, sitting there in the dark theater before a large screen with swelling music. Young Norma Jean was transported. For just a while, she was immersed in being someone else, someone else's life, someone else's story. Later on in her career, she would go back and reflect on the days she'd spent at the movies and how they completely changed the course of her life. I didn't like the world around me because it was kind of grim. When I heard that this was acting, I said, that's what I want to be. Some of my foster families used to send me to the movies to get me out of the house, and there I'd sit all day and way into the night. As she was shuffled from foster home to orphanage and everything in between, young Norma Jean learned something very early. That love isn't something that she could rely on. But being wanted, that was different. Being wanted got you attention, got you safety, got you seen. So she learned to soften, to smile, to become someone that people wanted to pay attention to. And it worked. You see, Norma Jean wasn't born Marilyn. She became her. From the outside, it looked like destiny. By the time she was 18, she was already making strategic moves to make her silver screen dreams come true. Starting her career as a pinup model, Norma Jean got plenty of opportunities to practice magnetism and feminine allure. By the time she was 20, Norma Jean had adopted a new moniker, Marilyn Monroe, for its cachet and star power. She was given her first film contract by some rather reluctant executives. She spent months refining her craft, spending countless hours practicing her acting, singing, and dancing. Her instructors shared the filmmaker's skepticism about her star potential. At the time, she was generally thought of as too shy, too meek, and too insecure to get very far in Hollywood. But Marilyn didn't let their doubts cloud her vision for the future. She remained focused, observed the industry with a keen eye, listened carefully to who people were telling her she needed to be. And eventually, something clicked. She started moving with more ease, speaking with undeniable charm, acting with allure. She started changing her physical appearance to match the internal changes that were happening as well. A brand new do of platinum blonde hair, punctuated by bright, punchy lips. Marilyn Monroe didn't just enter a room. She transformed it. There was something about her, not just beauty, but presence. She understood how to hold people's attention, how to create tension, and how to make everyone around her feel like they were a part of something special and intimate. She laughed easily, moved slowly, and spoke like every word mattered. And people didn't just look at her, they felt her. She didn't just attract attention, she held it. And for a moment, that kind of power felt like freedom. But as Marilyn grew and evolved, something started to change. The world didn't just admire Marilyn, it defined her. While she yearned to work in more compelling roles, Marilyn continued to be typecast on screen. While she longed for complexity, to be taken seriously in her craft, the world just wanted her for one thing: desirability. Although her stage persona was once the battle armor that she wore to win over Hollywood and the world at large, it eventually became a gilded cage that she couldn't escape. Again and again, the same roles, the same expectations, the same version of herself reflected back to her. And the longer she stayed trapped by the world's perception of who she was, the unhappier Marilyn became. The same thing that made her powerful became one of the greatest limitations of her life. Because when the world decides who you are, it becomes harder to remember who you were. Behind the image, there was exhaustion, loneliness, and a quiet kind of disconnection. She wanted to be taken seriously, to be valued beyond the surface, to be seen for the authentic version of herself. But every attempt to step outside of that identity was met with resistance. And so she stayed inside it. She smiled for the camera, posed for the picture. But inside, it tore her apart. Marilyn was an incredibly complex, sensitive, and self-aware person who never got the opportunity to share more than one facet of who she was with the world, which is how she found herself standing on that stage at Madison Square Garden that fateful evening in May. Her relationship with President John F. Kennedy had long been under the cloak of suspicion and gossip. But at that moment, as she walked onto the stage, it didn't matter. The crowd was roaring. The country waited on bated breath. Marilyn could feel them. Every eye in the nation was fixed on her, and she knew it. She sauntered up to the podium, shoulders held back gracefully. She parted her lips and began her jazzy rendition of the Happy Birthday song. For the occasion, she'd taken time to rework some of the lyrics as a special tribute to the birthday boy himself. The room was silent, electrified by that quiet energy that Marilyn seemed to bring with her everywhere she went. She didn't let it bother her. This was part of the game, part of the deal. And standing before the nation at the president's birthday was all the confirmation she needed. This is what people wanted from her. And if she wanted them to be there for her, she'd give them exactly what their hearts desired. The reality was, her reputation as a sex symbol was tearing her apart inside, leaving her feeling misunderstood. But it was better than being ignored, better than being alone, despite having millions of adoring fans. Professional success, beauty, wealth, fame, 3 shots at a happily ever after. Marilyn Monroe's life ended quietly, unassumingly, alone. At just 36 years old, the blonde bombshell who'd become the world's dream girl lost the opportunity to live the life that she'd been dreaming of for herself. Marilyn didn't lose herself all at once. She lost herself slowly in what everyone else wanted her to be. This is the shadow side of the lover archetype, because the lover is powerful. She connects, she attracts, she brings life to everything around her. But when that energy becomes externalized, when your sense of self starts to depend on how others respond to you, something shifts. Desire becomes dependency. Instead of choosing your life and experiencing it for yourself, you start performing it. When your identity becomes what others desire, you risk losing yourself. Despite seemingly having it all, adoring fans, successful career, money, beauty, fame, none of Marilyn's success could quench Norma Jean's need to be seen, to be appreciated, to be loved. She spent her whole life chasing a dream. Not the dream of fame and fortune, but the dream of being accepted for who she truly was. And this isn't just Marilyn's story. We see it everywhere. In the way we present ourselves, in the way we curate our lives, in the ways we measure our worth. We don't just live our lives anymore. We perform versions of ourselves that we think will be loved. When your value is placed on how you're perceived, you're always at risk of disappearing. Marilyn Monroe is more than just a symbol of desire. She was a woman who became so deeply identified with what the world loved about her that she struggled to exist outside of that. Because when you spend so much of your time focused on becoming what the world desires, you forget how to belong to yourself. I think Marilyn's story poses a really important question. Can a woman be intensely desired without losing herself in it? Elizabeth Taylor gives us a complicated answer to that question, because Liz Taylor was also drop-dead beautiful. She was also misunderstood, over-sexualized, sensationalized, and looked at like a bug under a microscope. But where Marilyn seemed to disappear behind this perfect vignette that the world had crafted for her, Liz found ways to lean into the public's appeal without losing herself in it. She wasn't afraid to make mistakes, to take risks, to love intensely. And sometimes that meant that she lived very much in the shadow expression of the lover archetype. But what separates Liz, that thing that Marilyn just couldn't seem to get a grasp of, is this. She always seemed to return back to herself, her center, and her own desires for her life. She turned romance into connection, beauty into purpose and generosity. She wasn't content with just being looked at and adored by the public. No, she was determined to decide what that attention could be used for. Shining diamonds, lively violet eyes, long, full lashes. Flashbulbs explode as soon as she enters the room. Elizabeth Taylor didn't walk quietly through life. She arrived. The world saw glamour and it saw beauty, but what a lot of people missed was the hunger that was bubbling just beneath the surface. Behind the jewels and the spectacle was something much deeper. A woman who loved life intensely, who wanted to feel it all, and never apologized for demanding more than dullness, duty, and restraint. So Elizabeth understood from a really young age that beauty impacts the way people treat you. It had been that way for her whole life. Born in England in 1932 to American parents, the Taylor family soon relocated back to the United States when Elizabeth was just a young child. From a young age, Elizabeth's looks drew attention. Lustrous dark hair, deep blue eyes, so striking and vibrant that they appeared almost purple, extra thick, full lashes. Very quickly, acquaintances and strangers were encouraging the Taylor parents to get their daughter into show business immediately. It seemed like Elizabeth was destined for stardom. It didn't take long for the Hollywood machine to draw a keen interest in young Elizabeth. But something that's notable is that she wasn't marketed in the sweet, angelic way that contemporary child stars like Shirley Temple were. No, even from a young age, there was something about Elizabeth. She didn't just get attention, she commanded it. And she was aware of that magnetism, even in her childhood. Elizabeth herself would go on to lament that she felt the different treatment that she got from other child stars at the age. Elizabeth worked during a time when Hollywood studios basically owned actors' contracts, and the studios were the ones that decided what roles and projects they would take on. Effectively, they were able to completely control the image of their stars, including Elizabeth. She was frequently marketed for her appearance, even if the role didn't really ask for that. And it didn't take long for Elizabeth to tire of the narrow box that they placed her in. She got sick of being typecast as this insatiable, dark, femme fatale figure. But here's where Elizabeth really started coming into her own. She didn't let that resentment cloud her natural magnetism. Instead, she strategically leaned into society's expectations of her. Liz would go on to star in classic films like National Velvet, Giant, and of course, Cleopatra, who has also happened to make an appearance on this channel before, if you're interested in checking that out after this video. Cleopatra in particular is known as one of her most influential and iconic roles, and perhaps not for the reason that you're expecting. Yes, of course, the makeup and the costumes and the jewelry were to die for. Yes, her steamy on-set romance became the stuff of Hollywood legend. More on that later. But it was even more than that, because Elizabeth's starring role as Cleopatra became a historic moment, not just for herself, but for the Hollywood industry as a whole. For playing the role of Cleopatra in the film, Elizabeth Taylor became the first actor to ever be paid $1 million for a role. And this is where Liz's intelligence within her lover archetype really shines through. She could have allowed bitterness about her typecasting lead her decisions and end her film career. But instead, she made the strategic choice and decided to lean into it. Not the way that Hollywood wanted to define who she was, but on her own terms. And she made it work for her. That strategic use of allure is sophisticated lover energy. Elizabeth refused to let the public perception of her influence how she felt about herself. Sure, she played into it for her benefit, give the people what they want, right? But she didn't let that identity consume her. That's perhaps one of the biggest lover lessons that we can learn from Elizabeth Taylor. Because here's what she understood. There's power and magnetism in beauty, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that. On the contrary, the lover knows that beauty can open doors. They appreciate that. They luxuriate in it. They seek out that beauty at every opportunity that they can. But the healthy, grounded lover is able to keep this all in perspective. Yes, beauty and allure can open doors, but the end goal shouldn't be just walking through the threshold. The healthy, embodied lover knows that what matters the most is what you do when you enter the room. Beauty may hold the key, but it's up to you to use it to get somewhere. What made Elizabeth particularly unforgettable was never just beauty. Sure, beauty gets attention, but feeling is what holds it. And Elizabeth, she had emotional vividness. On screen, Elizabeth was able to be both charming, witty, and good-humored, while also embodying intensity, vulnerability, and seduction. She was so dynamic on screen that she felt alive, like she was standing right in front of you. Even on the rare occasions where she wasn't being typecast into the alluring femme fatale role, she was able to capture audiences. One of the most notable examples of this juxtaposition is her film, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Elizabeth, who had always been seen in such a glamorous light, completely shattered audiences' expectations of her. She threw herself in the role. She gained weight, she dragged down her appearance, she came across as bitter and cynical and angry. And audiences were delightedly surprised by this switch up for this actress that they'd known for such a long time. They were intrigued by her emotional complexity and the way that she was able to shift gears into this completely different type of character. They'd never seen this side of her before, and it made her even more compelling that she was able to shift so seamlessly between these two roles. I think what's even more important about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is that she was actually good in this role. It was a really validating moment for her and her craft as an actor. She was able to breathe her own brand of light and charm into this very abrasive, bitter character. And this is another great example of lover archetype mastery, because where other people see drabness and flatness, Elizabeth saw emotional complexity and an opportunities to subvert expectations. The lover archetype becomes truly unforgettable when you have depth to back up the beauty. Now, we cannot talk about Elizabeth Taylor embodying the lover archetype without talking about romance, because Liz was a woman who loved being in love. One of her most notable claims to fame is her 8 marriages to 7 different men. And that's not because she was shallow. It's because she loved love. The emotional connection, the passion, the excitement. In her later years, Liz was also able to look back and reflect on her choice to marry as often as she did, and she attributes it to her strict upbringing and traditional beliefs about marriage and relationships. Either way, it became very clear to Elizabeth and the public at large that marriage symbolized something deep for her: hope, devotion, and the promise of a new beginning. At just 18 years old, Elizabeth took her first walk down the aisle, marrying hotel heir Conrad Hilton. Yes, those Hiltons. This first marriage is a really great symbol of Elizabeth's youthful naivete. In her later years, she would describe how this marriage was her attempt at escape. You have to remember that she'd been a child star for years at that point. She was used to being controlled by her parents, by her production company, and she looked at this marriage as the opportunity for her to finally gain control of her life. But her happily ever after wasn't to be this time around. The marriage lasted about 8 months before she realized this was not the fairy tale escape she'd been hoping for. At just 20 years old, Elizabeth married Michael Wilding, a fellow actor who was 20 years her senior. The relationship appeared to be mutually beneficial. Elizabeth was finally going to get the stability and the structure that she'd been craving for such a long time. Michael, an actor who was kind of down on his luck, was hoping that being linked with Elizabeth would add a boost to his career. Out of love for her husband and the strong need to make her marriage work, Elizabeth accepted roles and projects that she wasn't really interested in, just hoping it would benefit Michael. But unsurprisingly, putting herself aside for someone else didn't solve the problem either. After having 2 sons together, the couple split up when Elizabeth was only 24 years old. From there, she married producer Mike Todd just a month after her divorce with Michael Wilding was finalized. Now, Mike Todd actually seemed like a great match for Elizabeth. He was so extra, just like her. He loved public displays of affection and extravagance and spoiling her. The two welcomed a daughter together, and it seemed like Liz had finally found herself lucky in love. But shortly after their 1-year anniversary, Mike unfortunately passed away in a plane accident. Elizabeth was crushed, and that raw grief left her vulnerable to anybody who was going to show her compassion and care. Enter Eddie Fisher. Eddie Fisher was a singer and a mutual friend of Elizabeth and Mike's. Eddie had worked closely with Mike on numerous occasions, and he was particularly devastated with his loss as well. The lover archetype thrives on emotional connection, and Elizabeth was certainly no different in this instance. She leaned on Eddie, feeling like he was the only person who understood the depth of her pain. The problem? Eddie was married to one of Liz's really good friends at the time, Debbie Reynolds. When Eddie and Elizabeth's affair became public, it completely turned her world upside down. Overnight, she went from bereaved mother of 3 to backstabbing homewrecker. Elizabeth was later able to reflect on this relationship, and she was better able to understand that it was a coping mechanism to deal with her grief from losing Mike. But that didn't stop her from marrying Eddie in 1959. And then came Richard Burton, perhaps the most famous chapter in Elizabeth Taylor's Little Black Book. In 1962, they started this torrid, illicit affair while they were filming Cleopatra in Italy. Both actors were married at the time. It didn't take long for the media to capture them on film, and the world was instantly scandalized. The Pope himself condemned their erotic vagrancy, as the two were regularly seen walking around Italy, holding hands, and flaunting their indiscretion. This marked a turning point, not just for Elizabeth and Dick, but for pop culture as a whole. Suddenly, the illusion of the polished silver screen stars had cracked. Private affairs were now public spectacle. Eventually, both parties left their respective spouses and married each other. Twice. But throughout their relationship, Liz and Dick were able to move through public scrutiny with strategic planning. Instead of resisting the frenzy that was surrounding them everywhere they went, they leaned into it. They worked together constantly, starring in 11 films together. They were constantly photographed by paparazzi, and not just regular photographs. These were pictures of them drenched in furs and diamonds, designer clothes, stepping off of private jets, and yachting in the Riviera. For Elizabeth and her inner lover, this relationship became a drug. The opulence, the glamour, the emotional friction, every part of it excited her. They remained married for a decade before divorcing, then remarried about a year later, and that second marriage lasted less than 1 year. Because decisions made from an ungrounded place rarely stick, even for an embodied lover. What we can take away from this chapter in Elizabeth Taylor's life story is that intensity is not the same as real intimacy and connection. Many people assume that the lover archetype is just for the young, but Elizabeth Taylor disproved that throughout her life. She continued enchanting the public, even as she aged. Film critic Roger Ebert once said, "The spectacle of Elizabeth Taylor growing older and more beautiful continues to amaze the population. She chose to age naturally, embracing each chapter of life with poise and grace." After formally retiring from acting, Elizabeth decided to take her love for decadence, beauty, and luxury and turn it into something valuable. She took her passions and transformed it into a powerful fragrance and beauty empire, including her signature fragrance, White Diamonds. Liz's perfume line was incredibly successful worldwide. She was a pioneer, being the first celebrity of note to ever foray into the fragrance industry. Her company has generated more than $1.5 billion in total sales. That's no small feat, especially for a woman whose beauty and glamour were once viewed as shallow and frivolous. Liz proved that sensuality and desire can evolve, can grow, can change into something new. But Elizabeth's mature lover arc was about so much more than just making her own life better. She took that energy and used it to make the world a better place too. In her later years, Liz started turning her passion into purpose. In the 1980s, in the middle of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, Elizabeth found herself overwhelmed with compassion for those that were suffering, including people like her lifelong friend, Rock Hudson. Determined to do something about this crisis, she poured herself into fundraising and advocacy for this newly discovered disease. Elizabeth was recorded as saying that even though she really resented all of the media attention she was getting, even after stepping away from acting, she wanted to take that attention and turn it into something meaningful, to use the spotlight that she was given for something good. Through her many philanthropic works, Elizabeth Taylor was able to raise upwards of $250 million for HIV research and activism. And this is peak evolved lover energy. Not just moved by love for oneself, but for love of your fellow man. Elizabeth's personal transformation seemed to have undergone the full 180 when she was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. From scandalous tabloid staple to gracious, elegant philanthropist, Elizabeth Taylor has always captured the eyes and ears of the public because she's always led with her heart. The highest expression of the lover archetype doesn't just consume beauty, she creates it around her. Elizabeth Taylor teaches us that the true lover archetype isn't just about being desired. It's about fully engaging with your life. To love deeply, to grieve deeply, to enjoy richly, to age honestly, to remain generous, and to keep your appetite for beauty without apology. A shadow expression of the lover is often chasing stimulation, numbing pain through romance, and confusing chaos with passion. But an embodied lover is different. She allows herself to feel things freely, to savor life, to choose wisely, and to transform pain into compassion. Elizabeth lived in both the light and the shadow of the lover archetype. And that's what made her so enchanting. She had diamonds, she had fame, she had lovers, and she had scandal. But the greatest luxury that Elizabeth Taylor had was this: she never stopped falling in love with her life. Looking back on all of these stories in hindsight, I think it becomes really clear what the lover archetype is all about. Aphrodite shows us the source, desire as life force. Marilyn shows us the danger, what happens when that life force becomes dependent on the gaze of other people. And Elizabeth shows us the possibility of integration, feeling deeply without letting those feelings completely define you. The lover's greatest gift isn't beauty or desirability. She's not here to make people want her. Instead, the lover meets the world with an open heart and boldly declares, I want to be here. I want to experience life and all that it has to offer. The good, the bad, and the painful. I want to feel this. I want to love it. And I want to create something beautiful and meaningful from that well of deep emotion. And I think the real work for us modern day lovers is figuring out how to bring that aliveness, that spark and joy and excitement back into our own lives. And there are so many beautiful ways that that can manifest in your everyday life. Beauty can enhance it. Pleasure can be a celebration of it. But it's important to keep the perspective that beauty and relationships aren't what's going to spark that inner flame within us. That has to come from that deep inner work of getting good with yourself. Because as these incredible figures have shown, there's nothing in the world more alluring or magnetic or irresistible than a woman who's truly in love with her life. If you're still here for what I'm sure ended up being a longer video, please know that I appreciate you and I'm so glad that you stuck around. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure that you like it and subscribe if you'd like to see more of this type of content. Also, let me know, what do you think of when you hear the lover archetype? Have any of the points that I brought up in this video changed your perception of what it means to healthfully embody your inner lover? If you're interested in hanging out for just a little bit longer, I think you're really going to enjoy my deep dive into the Queen archetype on screen now. So I'll see you over there, or I'll just catch you next time. Until then, take care of yourselves. Bye guys.